So let's work through it a line at a time. Each of us by nature sees the whole world from one point of view with a perspective and selectiveness peculiar to himself. So let's just restate it in your own words. What has been said in the first sentence?
So it's just saying like we all see the world in our own point of view, like based on like what we believe, what we know, etc., etc.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna. Yeah, we all see the world from a perspective that's just ours, um, just from where we live, how we've been raised. What's your skin color and how does that affect where you live and how you get perceived? What's your gender? What are you wearing? What things have you seen that inform yourself? Saying every single person has one particular perspective that they see from out of billions, right? Just one. So the second sentence, and even when we build disinterested fantasies, they are saturated with and limited by our own psychology. So this one's got some weird stuff going on. How would you guys explain this sentence in your own words? You might
I
want to
think
start with the disinterested fantasies.
I think it's saying like that even though we can see the world differently, we're still gonna be like limited by the reality what we see every day.
Gotcha. Yeah, exactly, right? So even when we build disinterested fantasies, so when you think of fantasy, like the fantasy genre or something, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it's generally like a positive connotation. People like reading fantasy, watching fantasy. Maybe some of you are fans of that genre. But C.S. Lewis specifically says when we build disinterested fantasies. So what might that disinterested imply about the fantasies that we sometimes build? And the rest of the sentence helps explain what he means by that.
That they can never happen.
What do you mean? Yeah, keep expanding on that.
So like let's say I wanted to be like, I don't know, a CEO of Apple or something, but I'm barely in college, so I don't have a chance at that yet. So something like that, I guess.
Okay, I think that's definitely part of it. These fantasies being built are ones that we don't know, right? Like if you built the fantasy of being a CEO, you don't know what it's actually like to be a CEO at this point. So you're right, they'd be limited in that way. How else can we build upon this? What else might it mean by disinterested fantasies?
Maybe it's just me, but I kind of like tied it in with the whole social dynamics that are happening right now. Um, the whole like Black Lives Matter and everything that's way up in arms right now. So I'm kind of figuring like it's not a, I wouldn't describe it as a disinterested fantasy, but the, and I don't know how everyone believes, but personally, like I don't have the discrimination that other people have. So as much as I would love to have the fantasy and support and all of that, it's tainted with my own background of me not having that full understanding of what they're also going through. Like I would love to help, but just because I have my own reality, my own perspective of the world, I'm not fully ever going to be able to understand, I guess. I don't know.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you're moving toward the heart of this entire quote. You're right when you say that growing up, I don't know if you're from Idaho, speculative. If you're growing up in Idaho as a white person, you probably have had very few black acquaintances, let alone friends in your life, and probably none, if any, from an inner city. So a disinterested fantasy is a fantasy you build where like I think Hannah's saying, it's right. You don't understand fully the other people in this world that you're building, right? You don't know what it's like to be a Black person living in the city who's afraid of the police all the time. And that's why, as she was saying, the movements right now are happening. People are saying, listen to us, listen to our experience. We're sick of being treated this way, and we need your help to make a change. That's how a lot of protests go. And that's the heart of this one that's happening right now with Black Lives Matter. But here's the real specificity of this quote: disinterested. So if he was saying we're building interested fantasies, it would be a little different, right? If you're building a disinterested fantasy, you're not interested in stuff outside of yourself. So if you're building a fantasy world, you're writing a novel, or you're just imagining the world the way that you imagine it because it's the way that you know it, and you're not interested in knowing what other people experience, how they think, how they perceive things, what they believe in, if you're not interested in that, then you're completely limited by, as he says here, your own psychology. You are just saying, I have this one point of experience, I will protect it, it will be mine, I don't want anyone else's in mine. I'm going to keep it this way, and I like it this way. So that's where he's at so far. Our psychology, our experience is limiting us. And he says, we can build these disinterested fantasies where you're tricking yourself if you think that the way you view the world is 100% correct, because there's a billion other people out there who also view the world differently. But as Hannah was just saying, isn't it difficult to do anything about that? So he's going to talk about what do we do about that reality, that we're so limited. It says, good reading, therefore, though it is not essentially an affectional or moral or intellectual activity, has something in common with all three. So he's going to lead into some bigger ideas, but he's starting with this. How would we phrase, in your own words, sentence number 3? And feel free to look up any words or anything that you don't know.
It means pertaining to the affections, affective, emotive, characterized by emotion.
Yeah, so whenever you look something up and you read that definition, then think about it in your own terms. It had a lot to do with emotion, right? So
Yeah.
although reading is not only emotional or only moral or only intellectual, it has something in common with all three. So good reading can just be enjoyment. You don't have to just focus on it being emotional or just being a moral lesson or just being intellectual activity to sharpen your wits. But he says if you're reading well, it has something to do with all three of those things. Those are in a balance, right? So the next line, he breaks down, this is a really important writing move that most writers use, is he gives you a statement that names things, like you guys can think about your thesis statements that had 3 points. He names things. Affectional is an abstract idea. Moral is an abstract idea. Intellectual is an abstract idea. And then he goes 1, 2, 3. He explores the affectional, the moral, the intellectual, and he indicates that he's tying these 3 ideas to here by starting each sentence the same way: in love, in the moral sphere, in coming to understand. This is a tool writers use to indicate that they're explaining something they just said. Make it very clear that I named 3 abstract things, I'm going to explain each one of them, and I'm going to indicate I'm explaining them by starting all the sentences the same way. So let's start with the first one, with the affectional. In love, we escape from ourself into one another. So in your own words, that sentence, that's a pretty straightforward one.
It's kind of like when you hear people say that they don't love themselves, but they can truly love someone else, type of thing.
Yeah, great. Can anyone expand on that? You're definitely on the right track. What does it mean that love, go ahead.
Can you repeat that?
Oh yeah, so yeah, let's expand on that. What does it mean that what you just said about not feeling like you care about yourself, but you care truly about another's desires? Let's speak to that more. What does it mean to escape yourself through love?
I think it's just like the idea of like you're trying to love yourself, but you can't like mentally or emotionally let yourself do that. You can easily do it to someone else because it's like someone new. And the idea of being able to give those feelings that you want for yourself so easily to someone else makes it so you're like escaping your own reality, your own pain, and like putting all those emotions towards that other person.
Exactly, yeah. He's saying love, as he defines it, is when we escape from our own, look, back up here, limited psychology. When we escape our limited psychology and can truly feel for another person, understand what they think and feel, and do our best not only just to sympathize, but to empathize with them and act on their behalf without our desires getting in the way. So that's how he's defining love. And he's saying when we're reading, one of the parts of reading, the emotional part, is this, escaping from yourself and actually feeling and understanding what someone else feels. He's saying that's possible when you read. So let's move on to the moral. He says in the moral sphere, every act of injustice or charity involves putting ourselves in the other person's place and thus transcending our own competitive particularity. So how would you put this sentence in your own words, and how does it connect back to the last sentence?
I think that it can mean that in order to understand someone else's fight, or like if we put the example for the Black Lives Matter, they're trying to explain what they feel, what they want, why they want their justice, and they explain everything. And I guess just to put yourself into their perspective to kind of see what they're passing through.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Fatima. So he's moved from the emotional just feeling to the moral, right? You know in your own life when you've been acted against in an unjust way. You can feel it, and if you think about it, you can explain it to other people and say, this is not just, and this is not right for me. This dehumanizes me, and that's wrong. And he's saying in good reading, if we can feel the other, we can understand them. If they communicate their feelings, their emotions, as well as their thoughts on that to us effectively, then we can feel the injustice that they feel, understand it, and be motivated to act on it. As you guys were just saying, you were tying in Black Lives Matter. One of the cries of that movement is that the injustice happening to us can't change unless everyone helps us change it. So they're saying to everybody, you are partially responsible for us being treated poorly, and we need your help to change that. So that move from the emotional to the moral sphere. You can see and feel what we see and feel. You can think about all the videos you've seen about people being mistreated, or movies like Blind Spotting or 13th, for Black Lives Matter anyway. Books, you can read books like one called Native Son, which is just deeply effectual, or writings by authors like James Baldwin or Ta-Nehisi Coates. People communicate their feelings and their thoughts on those feelings if you're willing to go read about them. And he's saying once you can feel that, then you can start to understand the injustice we feel, the dehumanization we feel, and you can judge for yourself if you need to do anything to act out of justice or charity to help, to understand the other person, to love them. So then he moves on to the last of the three things he named, the intellectual part. In coming to understand anything, we're rejecting the facts as they are for us in favor of the facts as they actually are. So put this in your own words and tie it into what's come before.
I think it's the idea of stop making everything about yourself. Like, stop looking for how you can benefit out of everything. Like, take things as they are. Just stop looking for the benefit.
Yeah, I think you're really on something there. we all, because we're threatened by change, reject facts as they are so often because it's easy just to only look at the facts that you can see. So when someone else tries to present facts to you that make you see a dark part of yourself, people's first reaction most of the time, unless you've trained yourself otherwise, is to be angry at them and to say, no, I'm not going to listen to you. I will not understand you. I will not listen to your facts. It's probably one of the reasons that we have that famous saying on the news that everyone charges each other with fake news, right? How many people are willing to put in the work to look at all of the facts and try to determine what the truth is in a situation, when the facts that enforce what you already believe are so much more reassuring? You can just say, no, I won't listen to other people. So what he's done right here is say, this is what good reading is. It's affectional, it's moral, it's intellectual. And then he's explained, this is what I mean by affectual, this is what I mean by moral, this is what I mean by intellectual. So he's made a term, good reading, and then he's defined it for us. That's how you write well. You take an abstract idea, and then you fill it in with concrete evidence. And then we can judge whether or not what he's saying is true as we work it out. This is good reading in action. Have any of you, and maybe if you can just speak, because I can't see you all right now, have any of you heard of those terms, ethos, pathos, and logos? I'm seeing some nods, and you all scroll through here. Can you guys, who do know what those are, explain what they are real quick?
So, ethos is like the ethics, and pathos is like emotions and feelings, and logos is like logic and like reasons.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're reading about those concepts in a textbook, I think that they're really boring and limited, so that's why I don't teach them that way. But that's exactly what C.S. Lewis has just talked about, right? He's saying when you're judging a piece of writing, when you're judging a piece of good reading, you're going to have an emotional part. You're going to have a moral part. Do I trust this person? Do they have anything to say about justice or things that I can learn? And then there's an intellectual part. Does what they say stand up? Or do they have flaws in their intellect and so I shouldn't trust them because their facts are off? So the ethos is like your reputation. Do you have a good reputation? Do you represent yourself well? Do you live what you do, or what you teach? This is the moral sphere, right? Is there injustice happening? Are you a just person? And then there's the affectional, the emotional, the pathos, right? And these are things I'll be asking you to look at when you're doing your journals. The pathos is the emotion of the thing being communicated to you clearly, because the emotion brings weight to something and also can convince us that something's true. If we honestly feel it down in our gut when we see it, that oftentimes can convince us. But that's not quite enough, right? Then we need to back it up with the intellectual and make sense of it. Was that emotion a good, justified one or not? Usually feeling something deeply can charge you to think about it and to make sense of it. You test your intellect, right? So let's move on to the next sentence. He kind of sums up what he's been doing. The primary impulse of each is to maintain and aggrandize himself. I'm going to read the next sentence too. The secondary impulse is to go out of the self, to correct its provincialism and heal its loneliness. So let's unpack these two sentences in your own words.
So isn't it like the first one saying like the important stuff for an individual is to keep to him, to stay himself, but grow along the way?
Almost, yeah, you're really close, Christian. So the primary impulse of each is to maintain themselves. You got that totally right. And what does this word aggrandize mean? That'll help us clarify what the end of that sentence is. You might have to look it up. It doesn't get used too often.
It says like the increase the power, status, or wealth of, or enhance the reputation of someone beyond what is justified by the facts.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good definition. So our primary impulse, and I'm sure you can all relate to this, I know I can, is to say, I like who I am, I want more power for myself, screw you. That's pretty much, he's saying that's our first impulse all the time. But what's our secondary impulse? Something that we also feel, but that generally isn't as powerful.
Is it asking us like to step out of the box, like our own boxes?
Yeah, exactly. Can you build on that? What does he mean? What do you think he means by when we go out of ourselves, when we do these things he just talked about, loving other people and thinking about them? How does that heal our loneliness? He doesn't really explain that, but what do you guys think? He's kind of talked about it.
I think it's the idea that like human nature is obviously to take care of yourself and obviously like put yourself first and everything. But as we've evolved and like our second nature, although it's not our first, is like humans aren't made to be alone, and humans aren't made to just sit there and watch people suffer. So I mean, I don't know. The second nature is just trying to like bring us together, I guess, but human nature is obviously to take care of yourself first.
Yeah, and I think we can think about it this way. Here's a huge irony. When you're aggrandizing yourself, when you're only maintaining yourself, and you're angry all the time, and you're attacking other people, this often happens to us, whether it's verbally or physically, it's usually out of a sense of loneliness, right? I'm right, you're wrong, you don't understand me, I hate you. But he's saying, ironically, when you move outside of yourself and see the other and understand them, they empathize with you, you empathize with them, you now have a relationship and you're no longer lonely. It's a paradox, right? Your loneliness is fueling your hate, but moving outside of yourself will heal your loneliness. He's getting at that, and he's saying that in reading, we can do this. That's a pretty huge statement. So let's move on to this very last summary of what he said. In love, in virtue, in the pursuit of knowledge, and in the reception of the arts, we're doing this. It says we're moving outside of ourselves. Obviously, this process can be described either as an enlargement or as a temporary annihilation of the self. You guys have already been talking about that. But that is an old paradox. He that loseth his life shall save it. So he summed it up here. Well, what has he said? How do you guys react to this whole bit? What do you think he means by this whole process can be described as an enlargement or temporary annihilation of the self?
So my guess would be that it means something like you either see that you were actually right or that you were like way off and way wrong.
So this process up here that he's talking about, this affectional, moral, intellectual process of reading, how would that feel like an enlargement of ourselves?
So like you see the other side better.
Yeah, when you read other people, when you read their experiences, see their experiences, the intellectual part, the facts hold up, the emotions come through, you trust them, those three parts come together, then you feel like you've taken on a new perspective. You've now become more. You've taken in another person into yourself and can feel them and understand them. You've become larger, right? So why would he also say that that can be described as an annihilation of the self?
I think it means like it makes you like feel better after helping that person and understanding them.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think that's right on. A temporary annihilation of yourself. So the feeling, like he said, in love, where you no longer desire only what's good for you, but you honestly desire what's good for someone else. So it feels like your desires are gone for a minute. So he's saying when we engage in this process, we become larger because we feel like we're multitudes. We can feel and love and try to act on the behalf of many people. And it also, ironically, is kind of the annihilation of our ego, of ourself, of the desires that get in the way of everybody else. But he says that's a thousands of year old paradox. This is a Bible verse. He that loses his life shall save it. Yeah, good job. You guys read that really well.